how do you catch them?
Stepping into the mind of a murderer has been the life's work for investigative crime reporter and author Justine Ford, and she joins us now. Justine, good morning. When it comes to a murder or a homicide, where do detectives even start?
Well, they've got to start at the beginning. Who's the victim? So they can't find a killer unless they know who the victim is, so they have to try and identify that person. As well as that, they have to do a thorough examination of the crime scene. The victim can't talk for themselves anymore, but certainly the crime scene has secrets to give up. So they look for fingerprints, they look for weapons, they look for shoe prints, any clues that give them an idea of what's happened there and how. Witnesses as well. They talk to the people who are closest to the victim, so family members. If they can establish a motive, that's enormously helpful. And of course, they also set up a timeline at the start of an investigation. So they look at that person's movements in the lead up to their murder, and significantly, they try to find out who's crossed the victim's path in that crucial time.
Are prime suspects obvious?
Often. Often. You know, for example, if a woman is found beaten to death in her home and her husband has had a history of physically abusing her, then he's going to be the prime suspect. But these days, police are trained very thoroughly to keep an open mind, because sometimes the most obvious person isn't always the killer.
But it's quite often the case that the person closest to the victim is the murderer.
Absolutely, absolutely. Last year, the Bureau of Stats said that it's about 70% of killers and victims who are known to each other. But if you speak anecdotally to homicide investigators, they'll say that figure's more like 95%. And often the killer is someone in that primary relationship. But there are circumstances where, when investigators dig, they just find some kind of connection, in most cases.
How often do you find it as well, after a murder has been committed, that the murderer gets in front of the press and tears come out and they say, will someone come forward and do this, lying through their teeth?
Well, that's happened a lot. I mean, we've certainly seen a lot of crocodile tears, and I think one case that certainly comes to my mind is the very sad case of Kaisha Abrahams.
Yeah. Now, there is a huge obsession in this country with shows like CSI. How close to reality? I think not at all. You're shaking your head, not at all.
Much as I love CSI, it's entertainment, isn't it, really? No, not very close at all. You can't just solve a crime in a TV hour. I mean, it takes a lot longer. Investigations are exhaustive. Police don't sleep.
It is a good insight, though, into how meticulous they have to be. In terms of here at home, what have been some of the hardest crimes to solve?
Look, I think there's a lot, but certainly amongst those, I'd have to say the case of Somerton Man, going back to 1948 in Glenelg, where an unidentified man was found. He'd been poisoned to death, slumped up against a wall at Somerton Beach. Look, he may have been a Russian spy, but who knows? They've never been able to work out who killed him, because they still don't know who he is.
And the ones police have been most proud of?
Look, amongst one of the many cases police are very proud of is the solving of the murder of a little girl called Bonnie Clark. It happened in 1982. She was murdered in her bed 4 nights before Christmas, and police weren't able to arrest anyone in those early days. And then in 2001, so almost 20 years later, little Bonnie's dad phoned Detective Senior Sergeant Ron Eddles from the Homicide Squad in Victoria. Now, you would phone Ron, because he's actually Australia's best homicide detective. He's investigated 250 murders over 25 years, and he's got a 99% conviction rate. So Bonnie's dad phoned, after all those years, phoned Ron and said, "Listen, I'm dying of cancer. Can you find out who killed my daughter?" Well, Ron investigated, and to cut a very long story short, a name came to his attention, Malcolm Clark, who was once a boarder in Bonnie Clark's home. And he was able to prove, with the help of his team and an undercover investigator, that Malcolm Clark had indeed killed Bonnie. So not only did he give that family closure, but he granted a dying man's wish. So that's something to be proud of.
It takes a brilliant mind to get to the bottom of some of these investigations, doesn't it? It's all fascinating stuff. Justine, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
All right, after the break...